Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into the story today, I want you to take a moment and think about something: time. It's something we often take for granted, isn't it? We measure it, we plan around it, but how often do we stop to truly understand its power? Our story today, set in the heart of Prague, explores this very question through the journey of Jakub, a brilliant watchmaker who sought to master time itself. But as we all know, ambition can be a dangerous thing, and the consequences of tampering with the natural flow of life can be far more than we anticipate. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's step into Jakub's world, a world where time is more than just numbers on a clock, but a force that shapes everything. As we follow his story, I invite you to reflect on the moments that truly matter in your own life. And as always, feel free to share your thoughts with us along the way. Let's begin. Jakub, a watchmaker of exceptional skill, had always been entranced by the ticking of time. For him, the soft, steady rhythm of a clock's gears was not merely the passing of moments. It was the heartbeat of the universe itself. The tick-tock seemed to echo something far greater, something eternal and unyielding. He saw in time not a series of fleeting moments to be counted and discarded, but a force that shaped everything in existence. Time was more than an abstract concept to him. It was a living thing, a dance of cosmic proportions that governed the rise and fall of stars, the cycles of seasons, the beating of hearts. And in the heart of Prague, a city where ancient history hummed through its cobblestone streets and the grandeur of Gothic spires touched the sky, Jakub dreamed of building something that would encapsulate time in all its complexity. Jakub's dream was no ordinary clock. He wasn't interested in creating a mere instrument to mark the hours of the day. No, he envisioned something much grander: a clock that could capture the movement of the heavens themselves. It would not only mark the passing of time on Earth, but also show the stars' eternal dance, the phases of the moon, the ever-turning wheel of the zodiac, and the shifting positions of the planets. He wanted to build a timepiece that mirrored the vastness and complexity of the universe, a grand astronomical clock, one that would stand as a testament to the boundless beauty of time. For years, Jakub worked in the solitude of his workshop, hidden away from the bustling city outside. It was a place of quiet dedication, where the hum of delicate machinery filled the air, and the warm flicker of candlelight illuminated endless charts, notes, and blueprints. His tools were finely crafted, as precise and delicate as the clockwork he sought to create. His brow was often furrowed in concentration as he turned gears, aligned cogs, and carefully inscribed symbols of the cosmos into his designs. The workshop was a sanctuary for him, and each day felt like another step toward fulfilling his vision. But it was also a place of deep isolation. The world outside grew dim as Jakub's obsession took root. The people of Prague had long whispered about Jakub. To them, he was a man of mystery, a craftsman whose ambition seemed to stretch beyond reason. They respected his skill, of course. Few could deny the precision and artistry of his work. But they also questioned his sanity. Time, they believed, was simple. It was something to be measured, to be regulated. A clock was merely a device to help people keep track of their daily lives. The idea of a clock that could reflect the movements of the cosmos seemed absurd, even reckless. Time was not something to be worshipped. It was a tool, a servant, nothing more. But Jakub could not see time this way. To him, it was far more than a mere tool. Time was a force, an invisible thread that connected all things. It governed the motions of the heavens, the rise and fall of civilizations, the cycles of life and death. In the ticking of a clock, Jakub saw not only the passing of minutes, but the rhythm of the universe itself. His dream was not simply to create a timepiece, but to build a bridge between the earth and the stars. He wanted to capture time in all its complexity, its grandeur, its beauty, and he believed that if he could succeed, his clock would stand as a testament to the brilliance of the universe, a perfect reflection of its endless movement. Jakub spent years gathering the knowledge he needed to bring his vision to life. He studied ancient texts and celestial charts, learning the secrets of the stars, the sun, and the moon. He sought out scholars, astrologers, and mathematicians from across Europe, hoping to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. He traveled to distant lands to study the finest clocks and timepieces, learning from the masters of the craft. His mind absorbed all the knowledge it could hold, and yet he was always aware that the task before him was monumental. The universe, after all, was a vast and intricate system, and to capture its movements in a single mechanical creation was no small feat. The clock would need to be far more than a mechanical device. It would have to be a work of art, a masterpiece that blended science with beauty. Jakub's design was ambitious, too ambitious, perhaps. The face of the clock would be a map of the heavens, with stars that moved in their prescribed orbits, the phases of the moon that waxed and waned with the turning of time, and a zodiac wheel that shifted through the months. He wanted to capture the movement of the planets, their alignments and orbits, in a way that no one had ever done before. The clock would need to have intricate mechanisms that tracked the passage of the stars, shifting their positions as the days and years passed. It would show not just the hours, but the grand sweep of time itself, the vast, unending dance of the cosmos. The task was daunting, but Jakub was undeterred. Day after day, he worked in his workshop, surrounded by the hum of delicate machinery, the soft light of candles flickering in the dim room. His walls were adorned with celestial maps, intricate diagrams of gears and cogs, and notes filled with calculations and observations. Every detail mattered to him. Every piece of metal, every piece of wood had to fit perfectly together. For Jakub, there could be no imperfection. A flaw in one cog, one misaligned gear, could disrupt the delicate balance of the entire mechanism. His dedication bordered on obsession, and as the months turned to years, the clock began to take shape. The world outside was starting to take notice. Word of Jakub's creation spread across Prague, and soon artisans, scholars, and curious onlookers from all over Europe came to see his progress. They marveled at the brilliance of his design, at the way he had managed to merge artistry with precision engineering. The people who had once doubted him now stood in awe. Jakub had proven himself to be a master, and the clock he was building was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Yet, despite the admiration, there were still skeptics. Some questioned whether the clock was even practical. After all, who needed a timepiece that could track the stars? Others doubted that Jakub would ever finish the project, given its complexity. It was a vision so grand that it seemed almost impossible. Jakub, however, remained undeterred. The doubts of others did not concern him. He was driven by something deeper than ambition. He was driven by a belief that his creation was meant to be. The clock was not just a tool. It was a statement, a declaration that time was not something to be controlled or measured, but something to be revered and understood. Jakub believed that his clock could bring people closer to the heavens, that it could reveal the true nature of time. And so, he pressed on. As autumn descended upon Prague, and the air turned crisp with the change of seasons, Jakub found himself standing before the nearly finished clock. The skeletal frame had long since been completed, and now the final touches were being added. The gears that powered the movement of the stars clicked into place. The zodiac wheel spun smoothly, and the celestial map that adorned the clock's face glowed with an ethereal light. The clock was a thing of beauty, alive with motion and light. It was a celestial dance that could never be repeated, an eternal movement, captured in metal and glass. Jakub stepped back from the clock, his eyes scanning the intricate design. He could hardly believe that the moment had finally come. This was the moment he had dreamed of for so long, the moment when his creation would come to life. He had captured time, the essence of the universe, in a single, flawless timepiece. There was no greater achievement he could imagine. The clock was his legacy, a gift to Prague, and to the world a tribute to the beauty of the cosmos and the eternal dance of the heavens. With trembling hands, Jakub turned the key to set the clock in motion. The gears began to hum, and for the first time, the clock came alive. The stars rotated on their orbits, the moon shifted through its phases, and the zodiac wheel spun through the seasons. Time, as Jakub had always envisioned it, was no longer just a human construct. It was a living, breathing thing, moving in perfect harmony with the universe. And as the clock ticked, marking the passing of the seconds, minutes, and hours, Jakub felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His work was complete. Time, in all its grandeur, had been captured. And with it, he had left his mark on the world. Jakub's obsession with his creation deepened as each day passed, a hunger that gnawed at his very soul. Every sketch he made, every line etched on his blueprint, felt like another thread in the tapestry of his grand design. Each tiny detail was more than just a mechanical part. It was a manifestation of his belief, his conviction. His hands moved with precision, the constant turning of gears and the soft clinking of tools forming the rhythm of his life. Yet, with every hour spent in the dim glow of candlelight, the world outside seemed to slip further away. Jakub had become a man consumed. The sound of the ticking clock, his clock, was his only companion now, and the world outside the walls of his workshop was nothing more than a blur. At first, his friends noticed the change. He no longer met them at the tavern to exchange jokes or stories over a pint of beer. The tavern, once a lively place filled with laughter and camaraderie, had become foreign to him. Jakub could no longer find joy in those simple pleasures. And when his family tried to reach him, to pull him back into the fold, they were met with cold silence. His heart was wrapped tightly around the clock that was slowly taking shape in the shadows of his workshop. Even Victor, his apprentice, and the boy who had once looked up to Jakub with admiration and wonder, could no longer ignore the growing chasm between them. Victor had learned much in the years he had spent at Jakub's side. But now, as he watched his mentor slip further into the abyss of his obsession, something began to gnaw at him. He had been content in the past to silently assist, to take pride in the progress they made together. But now, the air in the workshop had changed. The walls, once alive with shared purpose and excitement, felt suffocating. Victor was concerned, no, deeply troubled for Jakub. One evening, as the last rays of sunset disappeared beyond the horizon, Victor put down his tools and stood across from Jakub. The older man's eyes were fixed on the half-assembled clock in front of him, his fingers moving with a mechanical precision that made Victor shiver. Jakub hadn't said a word for hours, and Victor had long since stopped trying to draw him out of his trance. But tonight, the silence was too much to bear. Victor cleared his throat, his voice quiet but firm. "You are losing yourself in this project," he said, unable to keep the concern from his words. "The clock, Jakub. It will never bring you the happiness you seek." Jakub didn't even look up. His hands moved as though they were guided by forces beyond him, the cogs and gears clicking into place with perfect precision. The rhythmic ticking of the clock echoed through the workshop, as if mocking the silence between them. Victor's words hung in the air, but Jakub did not acknowledge them. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, broken only by the sound of the ticking clock that had now become the heartbeat of Jakub's existence. Victor sighed heavily, watching his master work with such unwavering focus. The truth was, he understood the passion that burned inside Jakub. He had seen it grow, seen how the desire to create something truly extraordinary had consumed him. But Victor also saw the toll it was taking, the way Jakub's eyes had become hollow, how his hands shook when he wasn't focused on the clock, how the joy had drained from him. "I don't know if I can keep watching this," Victor muttered under his breath. Though he knew Jakub couldn't hear him, there was no point in arguing anymore. Jakub had made it clear this was his path now, one that he had chosen. And Victor, loyal to the man who had once been a father figure to him, could do nothing but stay by his side, assisting him, silently hoping that somewhere along the way, Jakub would find the answers he was seeking. Weeks turned into months, and Victor continued his work in the background. He kept the workshop tidy, maintained the small shop where they sold smaller clocks and timepieces, and ensured that the business remained afloat while Jakub focused entirely on the astronomical clock. Though Jakub seemed lost in his own world, Victor never gave up hope. He knew that Jakub's brilliance was real, that his skill and vision could change the world. He only wished his master could see that the world outside the workshop was still there, still waiting. The townspeople, too, had begun to notice the changes. The once vibrant man who had been a familiar sight around Prague's taverns and marketplaces had withdrawn completely. It wasn't just his absence from the social scene that caused murmurs. People were curious about the mysterious clock he was building. No one knew what it was, only that it was taking shape in Jakub's workshop, and it had become the subject of speculation. Some thought he was mad. Others whispered that the clock was more than just a mechanical contraption. They believed it was something mystical, something that could alter the very fabric of time. But whether they admired him or doubted him, everyone was intrigued. Jakub had become the talk of the town, the subject of hushed conversations that flickered like shadows in the corners of Prague's alleys. One morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the dust-covered windows of the workshop, Jakub paused. His eyes, bloodshot from days of sleepless work, looked up at Victor for the first time in days. It was as if something had shifted, a brief moment of clarity amidst the fog of obsession. The clock had come so far. The gears had turned. The mechanisms had fit together with flawless precision, but something still gnawed at him. The dream he had chased for so long, was it truly worth it? Was the clock he was building a symbol of brilliance or a hollow pursuit? "Victor," Jakub's voice broke the silence, rough and unfamiliar. "Do you think I'm chasing a dream?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Victor, startled by the rare glimpse of vulnerability in Jakub's usually steadfast demeanor, hesitated. He had never been asked such a question by his master, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. "I think dreams are what give us purpose," Victor said at last, choosing his words carefully. "But sometimes we need to remember the world outside our dreams too." And there was a quiet pause as Jakub absorbed his words. Victor couldn't tell if his answer had made an impact, but the flicker of recognition in Jakub's eyes told him something had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, the man who had built himself up around this single dream was beginning to see it for what it truly was. Something more than an escape. Something that could bring him clarity. Jakub slowly nodded, though the weight of his thoughts still seemed to press heavily on him. Victor watched, unsure of what his master would do next. Perhaps in that moment, Jakub understood that it wasn't the clock that would bring him fulfillment. Perhaps it was the journey, the act of creating, that had always been the most important. But Jakub was still trapped in his own mind, his heart still tied to the clock he had created. For the first time in a long while, Jakub stood back and took in the scope of his work, the way the stars spun around the clock's face, how the moon seemed to pulse with light. He had created something remarkable, something that could change the way people viewed time forever. But even as the gears turned, even as the celestial mechanisms came to life with perfect harmony, Jakub couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he had missed. Maybe it was the connection he had lost with the world outside the workshop. Maybe it was the people who had once meant so much to him, who had faded from his life in the wake of his obsession. As Victor continued to assist him, keeping the shop in order and offering quiet support, Jakub decided something important. The clock would no longer be an escape. It would be a testament to his journey, a mark of the sacrifices he had made and the lessons he had learned along the way. Perhaps it was time to finish the clock, not just to fulfill a dream, but to see it as a reflection of everything he had been through. And maybe, just maybe, it would bring him the clarity he needed to finally return to the world he had left behind. The clock was nearly complete, but for Jakub, the real journey was only just beginning. As the days slowly blurred into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months, Jakub's blueprint evolved before his eyes, becoming something far beyond the humble clock he had once envisioned. What began as an intricate design for a timepiece had expanded into a work of such magnitude that it began to resemble a reflection of the cosmos itself. His early sketches, once filled with tentative lines and rough calculations, had transformed into precise diagrams, each component meticulously planned and fine-tuned. Each gear, every cog, was no longer just a part of a clock, but a symbol of Jakub's unwavering commitment to the perfection of his creation. The celestial section of the clock, the part that would represent the stars, the moon, and the planets, had become the most challenging and complex aspect of the project. Jakub pored over ancient texts, dusty scrolls filled with forgotten knowledge, and celestial charts that traced the movements of the heavens. He consulted scholars from distant lands, those who knew the secrets of the stars, and even sought the advice of the local astrologer, an eccentric old man whose insights were both puzzling and profound. Each evening, Jakub could be found hunched over a table, immersed in the study of planetary orbits, moon phases, and the movements of distant stars. The clock was no longer a mere tool to mark time. It had become an attempt to capture the very rhythm of the universe itself. Jakub believed that time was not just a human invention, a convenient method for organizing the chaos of life. Time, to him, was a divine force, a constant and eternal cycle that governed everything. This clock, his clock, would be the embodiment of that force. It would not simply track the hours of the day, it would show the passage of the seasons, the changing phases of the moon, the eternal rotation of the stars, and the shifting alignments of the planets. In Jakub's mind, this was more than an instrument. It was a statement that time itself was sacred, a manifestation of a divine rhythm that connected the earth to the heavens. Jakub's workshop became a sanctuary for this sacred work. It was a place where the past and future converged, where ancient knowledge and modern craftsmanship met in the ticking of each meticulously crafted piece. The room was filled with the scent of oil, metal, and wood, a testament to the countless hours Jakub had spent laboring in near silence. As the weeks turned into months, the clock began to take shape. Each mechanism was like a note in a symphony, each piece of metal and brass carefully chosen and shaped to create harmony within the machine. Even as he worked, Jakub was aware of the passage of time. He no longer counted the hours by the ticking of his own clocks. He measured his progress by the completion of each part of the masterpiece. With each new addition, he felt himself moving closer to the vision that had consumed his every thought. The celestial components, delicate and intricate, required all his attention. Jakub spent countless nights studying, refining, reworking the mechanisms until every planetary gear moved with perfect precision, rotating in sync with the heavens. Each evening, as the sun set and darkness settled over Prague, Jakub would light a single candle and step back from his work to admire what he had created. The flickering light of the candle seemed to give the workshop a soft glow, casting shadows that danced across the walls, making the mechanical components of the clock appear almost alive. In those quiet moments, Jakub would allow himself to imagine the clock as more than just a machine. He thought of it as a bridge, something that connected the earthly realm with the celestial one. The clock wasn't just about counting time. It was about understanding it, seeing it for what it truly was, a continuous, cyclical movement that spanned beyond human comprehension. Jakub's mind would often wander during these moments of stillness. He thought of the constellations that filled the night sky, of the endless patterns that governed the movements of the stars. The clock was, in his eyes, a tangible representation of this vast and incomprehensible order. If he could capture the essence of the stars, the moon, the planets, then perhaps, just perhaps, he could bring order to the chaos of life. He was not merely creating a clock, he was creating a reflection of the universe itself, a small piece of eternity that would outlast him. His neighbors, however, were not so sure. In the small, tight-knit community of Prague, Jakub's isolation had not gone unnoticed. The whispers had started long ago, as his once bustling shop grew quieter and quieter. People talked behind closed doors, sharing stories about the reclusive watchmaker who had abandoned his family, his friends, and his community in pursuit of some impossible dream. Some called him a genius, others a madman. Jakub's obsession was no secret, and yet he paid little mind to the gossip. He had learned long ago that true vision was rarely understood by the masses. The clock, in his mind, would be his legacy, a legacy that would stand long after the doubts of those around him had faded. As the clock neared completion, Jakub could feel the weight of anticipation growing. The final components were falling into place, and with each piece that clicked into position, the clock seemed to take on a life of its own. It no longer felt like something he was building. It felt like something that had always existed, something he had merely uncovered. The celestial components moved with an elegance that Jakub had never anticipated. The planets rotated in their orbits. The moon shifted through its phases, and the stars, those tiny, glittering points of light, twinkled across the clock's face, as if they were part of the night sky itself. For the first time in years, Jakub allowed himself to feel a sense of peace. He had done it. The clock, his magnum opus, was nearly complete. The day of unveiling was drawing near, and with it came a sense of both pride and anxiety. Jakub had invited a handful of friends, scholars, and even the skeptical townspeople to witness the culmination of his labor. The room buzzed with excitement and curiosity as the guests gathered, eager to see the clock that had consumed Jakub for so long. Some arrived with skepticism, doubting whether such a fantastical creation could ever live up to the rumors. Others came with a sense of awe, believing that they were about to witness something truly extraordinary. Jakub stood before the clock, his hands trembling with both excitement and exhaustion. The time had come. He carefully wound the key that would set the mechanism into motion, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. The room fell silent as the gears began to turn, and the clock came to life with a quiet hum. The intricate dance of cogs and wheels echoed through the workshop, and as the celestial components shifted into place, the room was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The stars spun on their orbits, the moon waxed and waned, and the planets danced in their eternal paths. A collective gasp of awe filled the room as the guests marveled at the sight before them. The clock was no longer just a machine. It had become something magical. Jakub stood back, watching as his creation came to life, his heart swelling with pride. In that moment, he knew that his vision had been realized. The blueprint of eternity, once nothing more than a dream, was now a reality that ticked away in perfect harmony with the universe itself. As the gears turned and the celestial components aligned, Jakub felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His work had transcended the boundaries of time itself. The clock was more than just a tribute to his craft. It was a reflection of something far greater, a testament to the eternal rhythms of the cosmos. He had done it, and as the clock continued to tick, marking the passage of time, Jakub knew that his legacy would live on long after he was gone. In that quiet, shining moment, Jakub realized that the clock had not just captured time, it had captured eternity. Jakub worked tirelessly, his hands steady, his mind focused. The celestial mechanisms were the heart of the clock. This was where the true magic lay. They were not mere mechanical parts. They were the threads that connected his vision to the very fabric of the universe. With each delicate adjustment, Jakub could see the cosmos taking shape, a universe encapsulated in metal and gears. The stars, planets, and moons were not simple decorations. They were celestial bodies that would rotate, pulse, and dance to the rhythm of time itself. Every evening, when the workshop was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, Jakub would set to work, carefully crafting the miniature stars, planets, and moons. He melted precious metals, shaping them with an almost reverent touch, as though he were sculpting the very elements of the cosmos. Each piece was polished with care, catching the flickering light and shining like a tiny fragment of the universe. Jakub worked in silence, his movements fluid, his concentration absolute. He spoke to himself as he worked, but his words were soft murmurs, as though he were communing with the clock itself, coaxing it to life. The clock was not simply a machine, it was a living entity, and Jakub treated it as such. The stars would rotate around the sun in perfect harmony, he imagined, a celestial ballet that mirrored the movements of the heavens. The moon would wax and wane, just as it had done for millennia, marking the passage of time with its gentle cycles. The zodiac wheel would spin, marking the changing seasons, the eternal progression of life. Jakub could see it all in his mind, how the stars would spin on their axis, how the planets would drift along their paths, how the heavens themselves would dance to the rhythm of the gears. It was more than a clock. It was a cosmos, a reflection of the universe itself, set in motion by his hand. But the more Jakub worked, the more he felt the pull of something greater. It was as if the clock itself had become more than just a tool. The ticking of the gears, which had once been a simple sound marking the passage of time, began to feel like a heartbeat. With each tick, Jakub felt himself slipping further and further away from the world he had once known. His hands no longer just guided the mechanisms. They seemed to be guided by something beyond his control. The clock had become an extension of his own being, its ticking an extension of his own heartbeat. The workshop itself had begun to feel like his entire universe. The walls, once filled with the clutter of tools and materials, had become the boundaries of his existence. Time, which had once been something he merely measured, had become his obsession. The clock was no longer just a creation, it was his world. As the days turned into nights, Jakub found solace in the solitude of his workshop. There, in the quiet, with only the ticking of the clock for company, he could lose himself in his work. The rhythmic sound of the gears was soothing, like a lullaby that guided his hands with an almost mystical precision. The clock was no longer just a machine, it had become something far more profound, something that connected him to a larger force, something that spoke to him in ways words never could. Friends and family had started to worry about him, but their concerns were like distant echoes, fading away as Jakub focused solely on his work. They came to him, imploring him to take a break, to step outside and reconnect with the world around him. But Jakub couldn't hear them. He was too deep in the work, too lost in the process. The clock was more than just a creation, it was his purpose, his reason for being. He had become the architect of something greater than himself. He had become a creator, a man who would bring the heavens to earth, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The days passed in a blur of effort and quiet determination. Each piece of the celestial mechanism was crafted with care. Each gear turned with intention. Jakub felt a sense of peace in his work, as if he were channeling the very essence of the universe through his hands. He no longer worried about the passing of time or the world beyond the workshop. His mind was focused solely on the clock, on bringing his vision to life. The clock was no longer just a machine, it was a reflection of everything Jakub had ever wanted to understand, everything he had ever dreamed of. It was the embodiment of his deepest desires, a symbol of the harmony he believed existed between the earthly and the divine. One evening, as the sky outside the workshop turned a deep shade of indigo and the stars began to twinkle softly above, Jakub placed the final piece into position, a small, golden comet, delicate and shimmering in the candlelight. He paused for a moment, his hands hovering above the clock, as if unsure of what to do next. The room was silent except for the steady ticking of the clock, the sound almost alive in the stillness of the night. Jakub took a deep breath and slowly wound the mechanism. his fingers moving with the care and precision that had become second nature to him. As the gears began to turn, Jakub held his breath, watching in awe as the celestial mechanisms came to life. The stars began to spin, the planets began to revolve, and the moon started its slow, graceful dance across the clock's face. The zodiac wheel clicked softly into motion, marking the passage of the seasons, a timeless reminder of the cycles that governed the universe. In that moment, as the celestial bodies began their eternal dance, Jakub felt something inside him shift. It was as if time itself had stopped, as if the universe had paused to admire his creation. He stood there, transfixed, as the clock came to life before him. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Jakub's heart, which had been racing with anticipation, slowed to match the rhythm of the clock. The workshop, once a place of solitude and silence, now seemed to hum with life. The ticking of the gears filled the air, each tick marking a new moment in the unfolding symphony of the heavens. Jakub could feel the presence of something greater than himself in that moment. The clock, his creation, had become more than just a machine. It had become a bridge between the earth and the stars, a reflection of the eternal dance of the universe itself. A deep sense of fulfillment washed over Jakub as he watched the clock, his magnum opus, come to life. It was as if he had finally found the answer to a question that had consumed him for years. The clock was not just a timepiece, it was a manifestation of the very essence of existence. It was a celebration of the harmony between the celestial and the earthly, the seen and the unseen, the finite and the infinite. For a long time, Jakub simply stood there, his eyes fixed on the clock as it ticked away the moments of eternity. The clock had become something sacred to him. It was no longer just a creation. It was a part of him, a living testament to his journey, his passion, and his devotion. In that quiet moment, as the stars spun on their orbits and the planets danced in perfect harmony, Jakub knew that he had succeeded. He had captured the essence of the heavens, and in doing so, he had captured a piece of eternity itself. It was more than a clock. It was a masterpiece, a symbol of his vision and a gift to the future. As the ticking continued, Jakub allowed himself to feel the joy of what he had accomplished. He had built not just a clock, but a cosmos, a reflection of the universe, alive and eternal. The clock was nearly complete, but Jakub was not the man he had been when he first began this journey. The once pristine workshop, once a place of order and careful precision, had descended into chaos. Half-finished sketches littered the floor, their lines and measurements tangled in a confusion of symbols and calculations. Tools were scattered haphazardly across the room, abandoned in the rush to meet the demands of the clock. Empty bottles of wine were strewn around the edges of the workbench, their contents long forgotten, left to gather dust like everything else in the workshop. Jakub's obsession had taken hold of him entirely. He had not slept in days, his mind consumed by the ticking of gears, by the constant hum of the mechanisms that were nearing their final form. He could feel the weight of time pressing against him, against his body, his mind, his soul. Victor, ever the loyal apprentice, tried in vain to intervene. He saw the signs, the slow decay of Jakub's health, the growing hollowness in his eyes. He saw the trembling hands that no longer moved with the steady precision they once had, and the shadowed pallor of Jakub's face. But every attempt Victor made to pull his mentor from the workbench, to offer him rest or nourishment, was met with resistance. Jakub would wave him off impatiently, his voice curt, his eyes distant, "I am fine, Victor," he would say, though the words were barely more than a whisper. "Just a little longer. It will all be worth it once the clock is done." Victor could only watch, helpless, as Jakub pushed himself further into the abyss. He tried to remind his mentor of the world beyond the workshop, of the vibrant life that pulsed through the streets of Prague, of the laughter and joy that had once defined Jakub's existence. But Jakub's response was always the same, a half-hearted nod, his attention already back on the gears that seemed to call to him, as if the clock itself were urging him on. The people of Prague, too, began to notice the change in Jakub. He was no longer the spirited craftsman they had once known, the man who had laughed easily, who had been the heart of the tavern gatherings, was now a ghost. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull, his face gaunt with exhaustion. His hands shook not from the delicate precision required by his craft, but from something deeper, something that had taken root in his very being. And yet, despite the visible toll it was taking on him, Jakub pressed on, as though some unseen force had gripped him in its relentless grasp. He couldn't stop now, not when he was so close. The clock, with all its celestial components, was almost finished. His vision, his life's work, was within reach. How could he stop now? His obsession with perfection, however, had begun to erode everything else. The people who had once admired him now whispered behind his back. His family, his wife, his children were distant figures in his mind, memories of lives he could no longer touch. Jakub believed that once the clock was finished, everything would be made right. All would be forgiven. The clock would be his redemption, the mark of his genius, his legacy. He was building something that would last beyond his lifetime, something that would immortalize him and make up for the sacrifices he had made. He could feel it. This creation, this perfect clock, would transcend the bounds of time itself. It would be his eternal contribution to the world. But as the days dragged on and the weeks bled into one another, the people of Prague began to murmur with growing concern. Whispers spread like wildfire, from the busy markets to the quiet alleys. Friends and neighbors exchanged worried glances when they passed by the workshop, now a shadow of its former glory. The bright, welcoming light that once poured from the windows was dimmed, replaced by the dull glow of a single candle in the corner. Even the children, who once crowded around Jakub's doorstep, eagerly waiting to watch him work, now kept their distance. The ticking of the clock had become a haunting sound that seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, and something about it unsettled them. The world of Jakub, once full of light and warmth, had grown cold and distant, and they felt the change. It was as if an unspoken curse had settled over the workshop, and no one dared to venture too close. Victor, however, was not ready to give up. He had seen Jakub through moments of triumph and moments of failure. He had stood by his mentor's side through every challenge, every obstacle, and now, despite the growing rift between them, Victor was determined not to abandon him. He could see that Jakub was slipping further and further away, but Victor was not ready to let go. He devised a plan. He began visiting the workshop more frequently, offering his help under the guise of support, hoping to remind Jakub of the world outside, to bring him back to the life he had once known. Victor brought warm meals, fresh bread, and hot soups, hoping that perhaps the simple nourishment would help Jakub regain some strength. He brought new ideas, things they could do together once the clock was finished, plans for the future, tales from the tavern, stories from the past. Sometimes he would sit with Jakub, recounting their shared adventures in the city's sunlit squares, the laughter they had once shared. He spoke of the things that had once brought Jakub joy, the simple pleasures of life. But every time, Jakub would listen only half-heartedly. His attention would wander back to the clock, to the delicate mechanisms that now dominated his every thought. The clock, this masterpiece he had crafted, was so intricate, so complex, that it seemed to have taken on a life of its own. The gears turned relentlessly, and with them, Jakub's resolve grew stronger, even as his health faltered. Victor watched helplessly as the clock's ticking seemed to drown out everything else, the symphony of gears drowning out the rest of the world. Then, one fateful evening, as the twilight descended and the last light of the day faded into the shadows of the city, something changed. A soft chime echoed from the workshop, so pure and melodic that it seemed to resonate with the very fabric of time. Victor stood at the doorway, his heart racing, his breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a tension that hummed in the air, palpable and thick. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that Jakub had finally completed his magnum opus. The chime echoed through the city, soft and distant at first, but slowly growing louder, filling the night with its enchanting sound. It was the sound of perfection, the sound of a creation brought to life. Jakub had done it. He had created something that would stand as a testament to his genius, to his obsession, and to his vision. The clock was complete, and yet, as Victor stood there, listening to the chime that seemed to capture the very essence of time, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Jakub had succeeded in creating something beautiful, something eternal. But at what cost? Victor could see it in his mentor's eyes, the hollow stare that reflected not satisfaction, but a quiet, almost unbearable emptiness. The clock was magnificent. Yes, it was a marvel of engineering, a stunning masterpiece that would live on for centuries. But as Victor looked at Jakub, his gaunt face illuminated by the soft glow of the clock, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost. The cost of perfection had been higher than anyone had anticipated. Jakub had given everything to his creation, his health, his happiness, his connection to the world outside. And now, with the clock complete, Victor feared that his mentor had lost the one thing that truly mattered: himself. The clock stood there, a testament to Jakub's genius, its gears ticking away in perfect harmony. But Victor wondered if the price of perfection had been too great. Had Jakub, in his pursuit of immortality, lost the very essence of life itself? The clock would endure for centuries, its celestial dance continuing long after Jakub was gone. But what would remain of the man who had created it? Would anyone remember the human cost behind the creation of such a masterpiece? The chime echoed again, and Victor turned away, his heart heavy with uncertainty. The price of perfection, he realized, was not just measured in the hours spent building, the sweat and toil of labor. It was measured in the things one was willing to sacrifice to achieve it. And in Jakub's case, those sacrifices had been more than anyone, even he, could have foreseen. The night was as still as the void, the kind of silence that fills the space between the beating of your heart. Jakub sat alone in his workshop, his face cast in the flickering light of a single candle, surrounded by half-assembled gears and the scattered remnants of his tireless labor. He had long since lost track of the days, the hours blending together in an endless loop of work and obsession. The clock, His masterpiece was close to completion, but there was a strange restlessness in the air, a sense that something was missing. He had spent years pouring his soul into this creation, each detail more intricate than the last. Yet even as the celestial mechanisms began to take shape, Jakub felt that final piece, the piece that would make everything perfect, was still out of reach. As he adjusted a cog with the meticulous care that had become second nature to him, the door creaked open behind him. The soft sound cut through the silence like a knife. Jakub didn't flinch. He had grown accustomed to strange occurrences, the quiet whispers of his mind, the shadows that danced at the edges of his vision. It was as if the very walls of the workshop had absorbed the weight of his obsession, and they too had become alive with a restless energy. The figure that stepped into the workshop was tall, cloaked in black from head to toe, his face obscured by the deep shadows of his hood. Jakub didn't turn around, his hands still moving with precise efficiency, as though the figure were just another part of the ritual that had consumed him for so long. He could feel the presence of the stranger behind him, could sense the weight of his gaze, though the man said nothing at first. "You seek perfection." The voice of the stranger finally broke through the stillness, smooth and low, almost hypnotic. There was a weight in the voice, a strange resonance that made Jakub's pulse quicken, as if the very words carried an unseen power. The stranger's words hung in the air, heavy and laden with meaning, and Jakub's hands faltered for a moment, the tiny movement betraying the tension in his chest. "Perfection," the stranger continued, stepping closer, his voice now a whisper that seemed to penetrate Jakub's mind, "is what drives you, isn't it? But perfection comes at a cost." Jakub looked up, narrowing his eyes. His thoughts swirled in a fog of doubt and desire, but his gaze was steady as he turned to face the figure. The shadows seemed to twist around the stranger, an unnatural darkness that seemed to cling to him like a shroud. His eyes were hidden beneath the hood, but Jakub could feel the weight of the gaze resting upon him, unblinking, knowing. "What do you want?" Jakub's voice was low, rough from the hours of silence. He was no stranger to mystery, but this felt different, darker, more ominous. A chill ran down his spine. And yet, there was something about this presence, something that spoke to a deeper part of his soul. He could sense that this man, this stranger, knew things that Jakub himself didn't understand, things that could change everything. The stranger smiled then, a thin, almost predatory grin that never quite reached his eyes. "I offer you the final piece you need to complete your clock," he said, his words dripping with temptation. "A gift, but be warned." The smile grew wider, but it was a smile that sent an uncomfortable shiver through Jakub's bones. The price of perfection is always high. As Jakub hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly around the tools in his hands. The clock, his creation, the culmination of years of work, was so close to completion. He could feel it, the weight of its potential, the hum of the mechanisms ready to spring to life. But there was something in the stranger's words, a sense of finality, that made Jakub pause. What could he possibly want in return for this final piece? And yet, the pull was too great. His eyes flickered to the stranger's outstretched hand, holding something small, something glinting in the dim light. Jakub's breath caught in his throat, and before he could fully process the decision, he reached out and took the object from the stranger's hand. It was a gear, small, intricate, and perfectly crafted, far beyond anything Jakub had ever made himself. As soon as his fingers brushed against the gear, a coldness surged through him. It was unnatural, as though the metal itself absorbed the warmth from his skin, leaving his hand feeling strangely numb. The gear seemed to pulse faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the workshop. It glowed faintly, an almost imperceptible light that pulsed with an energy Jakub couldn't understand. The strange sensation in his fingertips lingered, and as he looked up, he saw the stranger watching him with that same inscrutable smile. The man said nothing more, but his presence was enough. The air in the room seemed to thicken, as if time itself had slowed. "Remember," the stranger's voice came again, softer now, almost like a whisper that slipped into Jakub's mind. "Once you accept this, there is no turning back." Jakub swallowed, the weight of the decision settling on his chest like a stone. But despite the warning, despite the creeping unease that spread through him like a dark tide, he nodded. There was no turning back now. The clock, the perfection he had spent so long chasing it, was within his grasp. It was all he had ever wanted. His hands were steady, despite the turmoil swirling in his heart, as he carefully placed the gear into the clock's mechanism. It clicked into place with a soft, satisfying sound, as if it had always belonged there. Jakub tightened the screw, and immediately the room seemed to change. The gears, which had been turning with a steady, predictable rhythm, suddenly shifted. The ticking grew more pronounced, louder, sharper. It was almost hypnotic, each tick a heartbeat, each tock a pulse. The clock seemed to come alive in a way that Jakub had not anticipated. As the clock's mechanism shifted, a peculiar silence filled the room. It was as if the entire world had stopped, holding its breath. The clock's hands moved with an elegance that took Jakub's breath away. The celestial bodies, those tiny, intricate representations of the stars and planets, began to rotate in perfect harmony. The moon shifted across the zodiac, the stars twinkled, and the planets danced in their orbits, moving with a rhythm so beautiful, so precise, that Jakub's heart skipped a beat. It was perfect. But there was something else, something that Jakub couldn't shake. A strange unease settled over him, creeping into his thoughts like a dark fog. The clock was flawless, but something about it felt wrong. The ticking had become too loud, too insistent, as if it were ticking down to something inevitable, something that could not be undone. The stranger's warning echoed in his mind. "Every tick of this clock moves you closer to the price you must pay." Jakub turned to look at the stranger, but he was gone. The door stood wide open, and the cool night air rushed in, sweeping the shadows away. For a long moment, Jakub stood there, staring at the place where the stranger had been, his mind spinning, his thoughts racing. The workshop was silent again, but it felt different now. The air was thick with tension, and Jakub could feel the weight of something shifting, something dark that had been set into motion. The clock continued its relentless ticking, each tick louder than the last, as though it were counting down to something Jakub could not yet understand. His heart raced, but he could not tear his eyes away from his creation. He had built it, had brought it to life, but at what cost? He knew that he had made a deal with something far beyond his comprehension. The stranger, the gift, the price. Jakub's mind reeled as the clock continued to tick, each passing second pulling him deeper into something that he could not control. But it was too late. The gears had turned. The clock had begun its eternal dance, and Jakub had sealed his fate. With the final piece carefully placed into the astronomical clock, Jakub stood back and admired his creation. The clock was more than a machine. It was a monument, an intricate masterpiece that had consumed his every thought, every waking moment for years. The celestial bodies, the planets, the stars, each one represented in painstaking detail, now spun in perfect harmony, their movements set to the rhythm of the gears that Jakub had crafted. For a fleeting moment, a sense of calm washed over him, as if the long journey was finally at an end. The clock was whole, and its power, so carefully crafted, was now ready to be unleashed upon the world. Jakub had never truly understood the full weight of what he had done, not until the clock struck midnight for the first time. It was not just a sound, it was a vibration that resonated through the very air, and with it came something extraordinary, something beyond Jakub's wildest expectations. As the chimes echoed through the workshop and the streets of Prague, the world seemed to shift. Above the city, the heavens themselves stirred, as though the clock had awakened something deep within the cosmos. The moon, full and bright, shone with an intensity Jakub had never seen before, casting a silvery glow over the rooftops of the city. The stars in the sky seemed to pulse, each one flickering with a vibrant energy, and the planets, those tiny specks of light, aligned perfectly in their cosmic dance. It was as if time itself had paused, as if the entire universe had taken a breath, waiting for the clock to strike. But as the clock continued to chime, marking the passage of each second, a strange stillness fell over the city. At first, Jakub thought it was just his imagination, some lingering effect of his exhaustion. But as the moments stretched on, it became clear that something far more profound was happening. Time itself seemed to slow. People stood frozen in place, their faces blank with awe and confusion, their eyes wide, unable to move. The air was thick, heavy with a tension Jakub had never felt before. It was as if the very essence of reality had been suspended, caught in the gears of his clock. Jakub, hidden in the shadows of his workshop, felt a chill run down his spine. The sound of the clock's ticking had changed. It no longer sounded like the steady, mechanical rhythm he had grown accustomed to. Instead, it was almost alive, the pulse of the universe echoing in each tick. Jakub's heart raced in response. He had known that this clock held great power, but he had never imagined that it could do something like this. The world outside had fallen into a kind of frozen reverence. The people of Prague, who had once lived their lives in the hustle and bustle of everyday existence, now stood motionless, as if time had lost its hold on them. The market stalls were abandoned, the children's laughter was frozen mid-air, and the horses in the streets remained perfectly still. Jakub knew instinctively that something had gone terribly wrong. His clock had not simply marked the passage of time, it had bent it, twisted it in ways that could not be undone. For a long moment, Jakub remained rooted to the spot, watching in stunned silence as the city remained suspended in time. It was as if the clock had opened a door to something else, something far beyond the earthly realm, a connection, perhaps, to the divine. He remembered the ancient texts he had studied, the cryptic whispers about mechanisms that could bridge the gap between the human world and the heavens. He had always believed the clock was more than just a mechanical marvel. It was a conduit, a portal to something greater. But now that it was working, he realized how little he had truly understood. The weight of his creation hit him all at once. Jakub had never intended for this. He had dreamed of a perfect clock, one that could capture the rhythms of the stars, a timepiece that could mark the passage of eternity. But now, as the clock ticked on, he realized that the balance of the universe had been disturbed. Time itself had become fluid, malleable, and the consequences were already unfolding before him. His mind raced. He had to fix it. He had to restore the natural order. But how? What could he possibly do to reverse the damage he had wrought? As he looked at the people frozen in place, their eyes wide with fear, Jakub knew he couldn't leave them trapped in this suspended moment. He had created the clock, and with it, he had opened a doorway to something much larger than himself. Now it was up to him to close that door before it was too late. With a deep breath, Jakub forced himself to move. The weight of the situation was almost unbearable, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to hesitate. His heart still raced as he walked through the hushed streets, his footsteps echoing in the silence that had descended over Prague. Every step he took seemed to stretch the minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. The world was suspended, caught between seconds, between moments, and Jakub could feel it. He could feel the pull of something greater, something beyond his control, tugging at him. Finally, Jakub reached the clock. Its towering presence loomed over him, magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. The celestial engravings that adorned its face seemed to pulse with life, each constellation carved into the metal now glowing faintly, as if it were breathing. Jakub could almost hear the whisper of the stars, the hum of the universe flowing through the gears. This was what he had created, a bridge between the earth and the heavens. But now that it was complete, Jakub realized how fragile that connection was. He had opened a door to the divine, but had no idea how to close it again. With trembling hands, Jakub examined the intricate mechanisms that had brought the clock to life. Each gear, each turn, was a part of something much greater, something far beyond his understanding. The central mechanism, the heart of the clock, was a delicate balance of celestial spheres and ancient glyphs. It was the key to the entire creation, and it was here, at this point of convergence, that Jakub had to make his choice. He had to restore the balance, but how? He couldn't risk destroying the clock, the work of a lifetime. But if he did nothing, the world would remain frozen, trapped in this timeless moment. The lives of the people of Prague were in his hands. The fate of the universe itself seemed to hang in the balance, and Jakub knew that every second counted. Summoning his courage, Jakub began to adjust the central mechanism. His fingers moved swiftly and surely, despite the tumult of emotions that swirled inside him. He felt the weight of the decision in his chest. Each adjustment, a step closer to either salvation or ruin. As he turned the final screw, the clock began to hum with a different energy, a calm, resonant hum that seemed to reverberate through the very air. The ticking shifted, becoming slower, softer, more harmonious. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The city remained still, the people frozen, the stars above twinkling serenely in their orbits, as if waiting for something, for Jakub's decision. And then, gradually, the stillness began to lift. Time, as it had once been, began to flow again. The spell that had held Prague in its grasp was broken, and the people blinked in unison, as though waking from a dream. They looked around, confused, but unaware of the extraordinary moment they had just witnessed. The clock, now at peace, continued its rhythmic ticking, its celestial dance perfectly in sync with the heavens. The stars above twinkled with a gentle satisfaction, their light soft and steady once more. Jakub stepped back, his heart still pounding in his chest. a sense of relief flooding through him. He had done it. He had restored balance. The clock stood as a testament to his vision, to the beauty of the universe he had captured in metal and gears. But now Jakub knew something deeper, something more profound. The astronomical clock was not just a machine. It was a gateway, a reminder of the fragile veil that separated the earthly from the divine. Time was not something that could be controlled, not something that could be bent to the will of man. It was a force far greater, far more complex than anything Jakub had ever imagined. And as the clock ticked on, marking the passing of each second, Jakub understood that the mysteries of time and the universe were not meant to be fully understood. They were meant to be respected. Jakub's journey had brought him to this moment, but it was only the beginning of something far greater. The secrets of the cosmos were hidden just beyond reach, and Jakub knew that the clock, though powerful, was only a glimpse into that vast, eternal mystery. He had been entrusted with its secrets, and it was now his responsibility to guard that threshold. Time and its mysteries had to remain in balance, and Jakub would ensure that it did. With a final glance at the clock, Jakub turned away, knowing that the world was forever changed. The heavens had spoken, and he had listened. As the days turned into weeks, the consequences of Jakub's creation began to show themselves, slowly but surely, like the creeping vines of a curse that had taken root in the very heart of Prague. The city, once vibrant and alive with the rhythms of daily life, had become a place of unsettling stillness and strangeness. At first, Jakub didn't notice the change. He was consumed by the clock, still in awe of its beauty, still lost in the idea that he had built something beyond human understanding. But it didn't take long before the effects of the clock began to show in the people around him. Some aged rapidly, their skin wrinkling and their hair graying overnight. Others, however, seemed frozen in time, their bodies unchanged, their faces as young as the day they had been born. It was as if time had become a merciless ruler, bending to the will of the clock, warping the very fabric of reality itself. Jakub's heart tightened in his chest as he watched his fellow citizens, once full of life and movement, now caught in an eerie stasis. Time had become something more than just a measure. It had become a force, a power that the clock now controlled. Jakub could no longer deny it. His creation was not just a timepiece. It was a master of time itself, dictating the flow of years, months, and days. The clock had become an unholy force, and Jakub was its architect, its unwilling creator. The weight of his mistake pressed heavily on him, sinking deep into his bones. The fear began to gnaw at him. He had created something powerful, yes, but he had also unleashed something dangerous, something that could tear the fabric of the world itself. He couldn't undo it, not yet. Every time he tried to dismantle the clock, the gears would resist, as if they had taken root in the very structure of the universe. The clock had become something far greater than he had ever intended, far beyond his control. The gears and cogs turned with a relentless precision, marking every second with a merciless beat. And each turn of the clock seemed to warp the reality of Prague itself, creating pockets of timelessness, stasis, and decay. Desperation grew in Jakub's heart as he spent sleepless nights poring over ancient texts, consulting with the city's most knowledgeable historians and scholars. He scoured every piece of lore he could find, hoping to find something, anything that might offer a solution. But each page he turned seemed to mock him, offering no comfort, no answers. The silence of the old texts was deafening, as if time itself refused to reveal the secrets that had been lost for centuries. As the weeks passed, Jakub found himself caught in a spiral of hopelessness. The clock, which had once seemed like a beautiful creation, now felt like a prison. His mind began to unravel, each tick of the clock a reminder of his failure. The city outside had begun to change as well. People who had once been his friends and neighbors now appeared different, as if they had been trapped in an endless loop, caught between the passage of time and the stillness of the clock. The very air around him seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, as if the world itself had been altered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Jakub found himself standing before the clock once more. The hands moved with their usual, relentless precision, a reminder of the chaos that had erupted from his creation. The sound of the ticking filled the room, each tick a grim reminder of the power he had unleashed. Jakub traced his fingers over the intricate carvings etched into the face of the clock, the celestial engravings that once brought him so much pride, now feeling like the weight of 1,000 years. The stars, the planets, the constellations, they seemed to mock him now. The beauty he had crafted, the perfection he had sought, had turned into something far more dangerous. He felt the full weight of his responsibility settle over him. He had built this, and now he had to undo it. But how? How could he stop a force that had become so deeply woven into the fabric of the universe? Then, in a rare moment of clarity, Jakub remembered something from his childhood. A story his grandmother used to tell him. A legend that had always seemed like nothing more than an old fairy tale. She had spoken of a hidden chamber beneath the city, a place where the ancients had once stored the secrets of time. Jakub had always dismissed it as a fantastical story, a mere myth, but now, as he stood before the clock, it felt like the only hope he had left. A spark of determination ignited within him. If there was a way to undo the damage, if there was a way to restore balance, then this hidden chamber might hold the answers. He had to find it. He couldn't do it alone, though. He needed help. So, gathering a small group of trusted allies, men and women who had worked with him in the past, and who still believed in his vision, Jakub set out on a quest to uncover the secrets buried beneath Prague. The journey was treacherous. The city's catacombs, long forgotten by most, were a labyrinth of dark passages and hidden doors. The air grew thick with the weight of history as Jakub and his group navigated the narrow, twisting corridors, guided only by the whispers of ancient lore. Along the way, they encountered strange phenomena. Echoes of conversations from centuries past reverberated through the walls. Flickering visions of events yet to come danced before their eyes. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. Jakub could feel the presence of something powerful, something ancient, watching them from the shadows. It was as if the very catacombs were alive, aware of their presence. The deeper they went, the more Jakub began to feel the weight of time pressing against him. It was as if the very ground beneath his feet was soaked in the history of the ages, each step forward an intrusion on the secrets of the past. The further they went, the more the strange occurrences multiplied. Figures from the past seemed to materialize out of the darkness, their faces lost to time, their voices distant and echoing. Jakub felt a growing unease, but he pressed on. He had to. He had no other choice. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally stumbled upon a hidden door. The markings on the stone were faint, almost invisible, but Jakub recognized them immediately. These were the symbols he had studied in his youth, the ones his grandmother had whispered about. They seemed to pulse with an energy of their own, as if alive with the power of time itself. The door was heavy, ancient, and it creaked as Jakub pushed it open. A warm, golden light spilled out, casting a soft glow over the catacombs. The light was inviting, yet eerie, as if it came from a place beyond the mortal realm. Inside the chamber, Jakub was met with a sight that took his breath away. The room was filled with artifacts of immeasurable power, relics from an age long past. On a pedestal in the center of the room rested an ornate hourglass. The sands within it shimmered with an ethereal glow, swirling in patterns that defied the natural laws of physics. The hourglass seemed to pulse with life, its sands shifting in a mesmerizing dance that captivated Jakub's attention. He could feel the power radiating from it, a power that seemed to hum in the air around him. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. Could this be the answer he had been searching for? Could this hourglass, this relic of the ancients, hold the key to undoing the curse he had brought upon Prague? With trembling hands, Jakub approached the hourglass. As he reached out to touch it, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if the universe itself awaited his next move. The air around him grew thick with anticipation, the energy in the room crackling with an unseen force. Jakub knew that this was no ordinary moment. This was a choice that would alter the fate of all who lived under the shadow of the clock. He hesitated for a heartbeat, his mind racing with the implications of what he was about to do. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but he knew there was no turning back. He had to act. He had to do something to restore the balance, to free Prague from the curse that had begun with his creation. With a deep breath, Jakub reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the hourglass. The sands inside shimmered and shifted, responding to his touch, as if recognizing his presence. Jakub's heart pounded in his chest, and in that moment, he knew this was the beginning of something far greater than himself. A new chapter in the story of time itself. Jakub sat alone in his workshop, the weight of his own regret pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He had spent years crafting what he believed would be his legacy, a masterpiece that would stand the test of time. But now, with the clock complete, he understood the true cost of perfection. What he had once seen as a symbol of ambition and genius had become a curse, not just for him but for the entire city of Prague. The very creation he had hoped would immortalize him had instead doomed him to live with the consequences of his folly. The relentless ticking of the clock filled the silence of the workshop, each beat like a pulse that echoed in Jakub's ears. It was louder than it had ever been, almost deafening. With every tick, Jakub was reminded of his failure, of the lives that had been affected by his unchecked ambition. He had wanted to build something beautiful, something that would bring wonder to the world. Instead, he had unleashed a force that threatened to unravel the very fabric of time. Victor, his once loyal apprentice, now stood in front of him, his face hardened with anger and disappointment. He had been Jakub's closest confidant, the one who had shared in the dream, but now he seemed like a stranger. The bond between them had fractured, and Jakub could see it in Victor's eyes. The young man's face was taut, his jaw clenched with frustration. "This was never meant to be," Victor said bitterly, his voice low and filled with grief. "You've played with forces you don't understand, Jakub. You've destroyed the balance of time itself." Jakub didn't respond at first. He could only stare at the clock, his gaze empty and lost. The sound of the ticking grew louder, a constant, unyielding reminder of the chaos he had set in motion. His hands, once steady and sure, now trembled as he clasped them together in his lap. He had poured every ounce of himself into creating this clock, believing it would bring him glory. It had promised so much, but now it seemed like the cruelest of jokes. He had wanted to control time, to understand it, to shape it, but in the end, time had controlled him. "I didn't foresee this," Jakub whispered, his voice barely audible. "I wanted to make something beautiful. I thought it would bring prosperity, harmony." His words trailed off, lost in the hollow space between them. He had convinced himself that what he was doing was right, that his creation would be a gift to the world. But now he saw the truth. His obsession with perfection had only brought chaos. Victor stood there, his eyes dark with anger and pity. "Beauty doesn't come from tampering with the natural order," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "We have to set things right, Jakub. There must be a way to reverse this." Ugh. Jakub could hear the conviction in Victor's voice, the last shred of hope that had not yet been extinguished. But Jakub knew the gravity of the situation. He had been the one to unleash this nightmare, and now he had to be the one to fix it. The clock had become a prison, and Jakub was its architect. How could he undo what he had done? The room fell silent again, save for the incessant ticking of the clock, each second ticking away like the countdown to an inevitable catastrophe. Jakub's mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing on him with unbearable force. To undo the damage, to stop the clock and the devastation it had caused, he would have to dismantle his life's work, the very thing that had consumed him for so long. The idea of destroying the clock, of tearing apart the intricate mechanisms he had built, was almost too much to bear. But the reality of the situation was clear. His pride, his ambition, had led him down this path, and now he had to pay the price. Jakub finally looked up at Victor, his expression filled with both sorrow and determination. "We must find the original plans," he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil within. "Perhaps there is something we overlooked. A clue, a detail, something that can help us reverse this." Victor nodded, understanding the gravity of Jakub's words. They would have to work together once more, just as they had in the beginning, before the clock had consumed them both. The task ahead of them was daunting, but Victor could see the resolve in Jakub's eyes. The time for regret had passed. If they were to undo the damage, they had to act quickly. Together, they began to sift through the cluttered workshop. Papers, sketches, and old tomes were strewn across the tables and floor, remnants of years of effort, of dreams that had once seemed so clear. The dim light of the workshop cast long, trembling shadows on the walls as they searched through the chaos. As Jakub flipped through the pages, old memories began to resurface, memories of better days, of moments when the clock was still just an idea, when it had been a dream rather than a curse. He remembered the nights spent discussing the possibilities with Victor, the excitement in their voices, the hope that filled their hearts. Those memories felt distant now, like echoes from another lifetime. Victor picked up a stack of old papers, scanning the drawings with an expert eye. He had always been the more practical of the two, the one who had kept Jakub grounded. But even Victor, in his frustration and anger, couldn't shake the sense that there was still something they were missing. Perhaps, amidst the chaos, There was a solution, something Jakub had overlooked in his obsessive drive for perfection. It wasn't until Victor pulled an old, yellowed parchment from under a pile of dusty tomes that Jakub felt a spark of hope. The parchment was old, the paper brittle with age, but there, in the margins of the document, Jakub recognized something: his own handwriting. His breath caught in his throat as he reached for the paper, his hands trembling. As he traced the lines of the drawing, he saw the familiar, intricate designs of gears and cogs. It was one of his earliest sketches, the plans he had drawn before the clock had even taken shape. This is it," Jakub murmured, his voice barely a whisper. His fingers traced the delicate lines of the diagram, his mind racing. He had almost forgotten about this sketch. It had been a mere concept, an idea that had never seemed important enough to follow through on. But now, as he studied it, he realized that there was a small, almost imperceptible detail in the corner of the page, something he had missed, something that, if incorporated, could hold the key to reversing the clock's power. "There," Jakub said, pointing to the tiny symbol in the corner of the parchment. "That could be the key." Victor leaned in closer, studying the sketch with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The symbol was unlike any other in the plans. It was a small glyph, a circular shape intertwined with ancient runes, the meaning of which Jakub had never fully understood. But something about it now felt right. Something in the way it connected with the other mechanisms, the celestial spheres, the gears, the cosmic wheel seemed to hold the answer. Victor nodded, his expression one of grim understanding. "We have to find out what this means, whatever it takes." The urgency in his voice spurred Jakub into action. The time for hesitation had passed. Together, they began to decipher the symbol, to unravel the mystery that lay hidden in the ancient text. They knew that the task ahead of them would be dangerous, that undoing the clock's power might come at a great cost. But there was no turning back now. They had to restore balance, to right the wrongs that had been wrought by Jakub's ambition. As they worked, the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening with each passing moment. The relentless ticking of the clock continued, a constant reminder of the power they were up against. Jakub could feel the weight of the clock's influence pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything they had endured. With each passing hour, Jakub and Victor worked in silence, piecing together the clues from the original plans, decoding the symbols, and deciphering the meaning hidden within the ancient drawings. It was a race against time, against the very thing they were trying to control. But Jakub was determined. He would find a way to make things right, even if it meant sacrificing the only thing he had ever truly cared about. The clock, with all its beauty and power, had to be stopped. The price of perfection was too great, and Jakub knew it was time to face the consequences of his creation. And with Victor by his side, he was ready to fight for the future, even if it meant undoing everything he had worked for. Together, they would restore balance to time, even if it cost them everything. Jakub stood motionless in front of the clock, his heart pounding as he took in the sight of the masterpiece he had spent years building. It was a thing of beauty, something he had once believed would make him immortal, a creation so intricate, so precise, that it seemed to reflect the very harmony of the universe itself. Yet now, it was nothing but a monument to his hubris, a reminder of the price he had paid for trying to control time itself. The celestial alignment, which had once felt like a symbol of perfection, now felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. The clock had become a force of nature, a tyrant that ruled not just the fabric of time, but the lives of those around him. People had aged in unnatural ways. Others had frozen in time, their lives caught in a cruel stasis. Jakub had built something powerful, but he had also unleashed a curse upon the city, one that threatened to unravel the very essence of life itself. He had to stop it. He knew that now. His hands trembled as he reached toward the heart of the clock, the mechanism that had caused so much destruction. He had built it with care, with love, but now it had to be destroyed. With one final, agonizing motion, he could undo it all. He could dismantle the clock and restore balance, but in doing so, he would erase everything, the beauty, the celestial alignment, and the legacy he had hoped to leave behind. It would all be undone. The dream he had nurtured for so long would be shattered, swept away by the consequences of his own making. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Jakub's heart ached as he reached for the gears. He could feel the power that thrummed within them, the hum of the universe itself vibrating through his fingertips. But he knew what had to be done. He had to destroy it, no matter the cost. His fingers hovered over the intricate mechanism, the cold metal chilling his skin, and for a moment, he hesitated. It was hard to let go of something so beautiful, something he had poured his soul into. But then, in that instant of hesitation, he knew what he had to do. The clock, the thing that had consumed him for so long, had become a prison not just for him, but for the people of Prague. It had to end. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, a soft voice broke the silence that had enveloped the workshop. Jakub's breath caught in his throat as he turned to find Alara standing in the doorway. Her presence filled the room, calming and gentle, like the first breeze of spring. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes filled with compassion and understanding. "Jakub," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with unwavering certainty. "Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing we can do." Her words, simple yet profound, wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Jakub felt the weight on his shoulders ease, just slightly, as though her presence had provided him with the strength he needed. He had been so lost in his desire to fix what he had broken, so determined to prove that he could make things right, that he had forgotten what really mattered. It wasn't about the clock. It wasn't about the legacy. It was about finding the courage to release the very thing he had held so tightly. Jakub closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The tension that had gripped him for so long slowly began to release. His fingers, still trembling, brushed against the gears, feeling the cold metal as it hummed beneath his touch. The clock, once a symbol of his ambition, began to give way, its power slowly, inevitably surrendering to the truth he had feared. As the gears ground to a halt, the city outside seemed to exhale with him. The celestial alignment that had once been frozen in place began to fade, the stars realigning themselves to their natural order. Time, which had been so mercilessly bent, began to return to its proper course. For a long moment, Jakub stood there, eyes closed, the silence of the workshop enveloping him like a soft blanket. It was over. The clock had stopped. The curse he had unwittingly set in motion was coming to an end. But there was no sense of loss, no bitterness, no regret. Instead, Jakub felt a deep sense of peace, as though a burden he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. His heart, once heavy with the weight of his mistake, now felt light and free. He opened his eyes and turned to Alara, gratitude shining in his gaze. She had been his anchor, the one who had helped him see beyond his obsession. The clock, once his singular focus, was no longer the center of his world. What mattered now was the choice he had made to let go, to stop fighting against the forces he could not control, and to restore balance to the world around him. His legacy, Jakub realized, was not in the clock itself, but in his ability to make the right choice, no matter how painful. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice filled with sincerity. "I could not have done this without you." "Oh," Ilara smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the same understanding that had guided her throughout this journey. "You've always had the strength, Jakub," she said. "You just needed to see it for yourself." Jakub nodded, his heart full of gratitude. He had spent so much of his life chasing after perfection, so focused on building something that would stand the test of time. But in the end, he realized that the greatest creations often come from the ashes of what we leave behind. The clock, with all its beauty and power, had to be destroyed so that something new could grow in its place. Jakub's journey had led him here not just to the destruction of the clock, but to a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. Together, Jakub and Ilara stepped away from the now silent clock. Its hands, once turning with relentless precision, were still now, its power subdued. The city outside had begun to awaken, the people unaware of the cosmic drama that had unfolded in the heart of their city. But Jakub knew that, in some small way, he had changed the course of time itself. And perhaps, in doing so, he had found his true purpose. The air was lighter now, and Jakub could feel the weight of his burden lifting. The curse had been broken. The world was no longer trapped in the clock's endless rhythm. And though the legacy of the clock would be lost to history, Jakub knew that his true legacy had been forged not in the pursuit of perfection, but in the courage to let go when the time was right. As Jakub and Ilara stood together, gazing at the silent clock, they knew that the future lay ahead, not in the shadow of the past, but in the embrace of a new beginning. They had faced the greatest challenge Jakub had ever known, and in doing so, they had restored balance, not just to time, but to their lives. The world was still, and the stars twinkled gently above, as if offering their quiet approval. It was time to move forward, to build something new, something born from the ashes of the past. And Jakub, finally free from the chains of his obsession, was ready to face the future with a heart open to all that it held. For the first time in years, Jakub felt truly alive. The day Jakub made the painful decision to dismantle the clock, the city of Prague breathed a collective sigh of relief. The distortions of time that had plagued the streets, the strange, frozen moments that had scattered throughout the city like cracks in reality itself, slowly began to fade. It was as though the air itself had been lightened, the world righting itself after a long, suffocating spell. The once perfect clock that had controlled the flow of time, its gears, its celestial alignment, its ticking that had once been so majestic, was now nothing more than a pile of broken pieces scattered across Jakub's workshop floor. Jagged shards of metal gleamed in the soft light, symbols of a dream shattered. Jakub stood over the remains of his creation, his face hollow and distant. His hands, which had once moved with such precise purpose, now hung limp at his sides. The grand vision he had spent so many sleepless nights toiling over, the obsession that had driven him to madness, had led him to this nothing. The clock was gone, its power extinguished, its legacy erased. The brilliance that had once defined him had become a hollow shell, consumed by the very ambition that had once seemed so noble. Jakub, who had once been the brilliant watchmaker, was now nothing more than a forgotten soul, a shadow of the man he had been. Prague itself seemed to shrug off the remnants of the curse. Time, as it always does, resumed its unyielding march forward. The city returned to its familiar rhythm, the cobblestone streets humming with the everyday bustle of life. Children played in the squares, vendors called out their wares, and the sun rose and set with the quiet certainty of the world's natural order. But Jakub, the man who had dared to shape time itself, had vanished. He had disappeared into the streets of Prague, just another forgotten figure, swallowed up by the city's vast, ever-moving current. No one knew where he went, and no one asked. Jakub had made his choice, and with it, he had erased himself from the world's stage. As the years passed, Jakub's name faded into the shadows of history. His creation, once the pinnacle of his life's work, was now nothing more than a tale told in hushed voices, a whisper on the wind. Time, as it always does, moved on. The people of Prague continued their lives, oblivious to the man who had altered their very perception of it. But the story of Jakub, the watchmaker of Prague, would not be easily forgotten. The legend began to take on a life of its own, woven into the fabric of the city's culture. Children, sitting around flickering fires on cold winter nights, would beg their parents to tell the story of the mysterious clockmaker who could bend time to his will. Scholars, sitting in quiet libraries, debated the ethics of his grand experiment, wondering how someone so brilliant could have fallen so far. Some saw him as a tragic hero, a man undone by his own ambition. Others saw him as a fool, a man who had dared to tamper with forces far beyond his understanding. Jakub's name echoed through the generations, carried on the lips of storytellers and philosophers, until it became a fixture in the city's lore, a cautionary tale that served as both a warning and an inspiration. Time, after all, was a powerful thing. It could be measured, but it could also shape a life. Jakub's story was a reminder of both its potential and its dangers, a reminder that those who seek to control time may lose themselves in the process. It wasn't long before a discovery would bring Jakub's legacy back into the light. In a small, dusty bookshop tucked away in one of Prague's forgotten alleyways, an old journal was found. Its leather cover was worn, its pages yellowed with age. But inside, the words were clear and sharp. The journal bore Jakub's initials, and as the pages turned, the story of his creation came to life once again. The sketches were there, the intricate designs of the clock, the notes on the celestial mechanics that had driven Jakub to madness. But what caught the attention of those who read the journal was something more, an insight, a theory Jakub had never shared with anyone. In the pages of that journal, Jakub wrote of time's elasticity, of moments that could stretch or contract, of a future where time was not a linear path but a vast, open field. The journal became an object of fascination, studied by scholars and dreamers alike. Some saw it as a blueprint for future discoveries, a key to understanding the mysteries of time. Others saw it as the ramblings of a madman, a cautionary tale of a mind too consumed by its own vision. Yet, no matter how it was viewed, the journal added another layer to Jakub's story, transforming him from a forgotten figure into a legend, a symbol of ambition's reach and time's power. Meanwhile, the remnants of the clock, its broken gears, shattered components were gathered and placed on display at the Museum of Prague. The once perfect instrument, now in pieces, was an artifact of history, a reminder of the man who had dared to bend time. People came from all over the world to see it, drawn by the mystery of its creation, fascinated by the intricate beauty of the gears that once turned so effortlessly. Some even claimed to feel a strange sensation when standing before it, an eerie pause in time, a fleeting moment when the world seemed to hold its breath just for a heartbeat. Whether it was the lingering presence of Jakub's genius or the imprint of the clock's power, no one could say. But the legend of Jakub lived on, not just as a tale of caution, but as a reminder of the mysteries that lay beyond the ticking of a clock. The clock itself was broken, its power extinguished, but Jakub's story, his legacy remained. Time, in all its complexity and vastness, had moved on. Yet, Jakub's tale was not merely one of failure. It was a reminder of the power of dreams, of the dangers of unchecked ambition, and of the profound mysteries that lay hidden just beneath the surface of the world. The clock had been a dream, and though that dream had come to an end, it had left behind something more enduring than any physical creation could ever be: a story. And so, Jakub's name lived on. His tale was woven into the culture of Prague, carried through the streets like the wind that whispered his name. Time, after all, is not just a measure. It is a canvas upon which countless stories are painted. And Jakub's was just one brushstroke in the endless masterpiece of life, a reminder of what can be created and what can be lost in the pursuit of perfection. The clock no longer ticked, but Jakub's story would continue to echo in the hearts and minds of those who heard it, a legacy that transcended time itself. As the days slipped by, a quiet unease settled over Jakub. Time had always been his obsession: the ticking of the clock, the movement of the celestial bodies, the intricate dance of the universe. He had sought to capture it, to control it, believing that by doing so, he could achieve something eternal. But now, as the weight of his creation bore down on him, he found himself wondering what had truly been achieved. He stood at the window of his modest apartment, gazing out over the rooftops of Prague. The city was alive with the familiar hum of daily life, the sounds of the market, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the whispers of stories exchanged between strangers. Time, it seemed, marched on relentlessly, regardless of his efforts. The clock he had built, the masterpiece he had poured his soul into, was no longer in its prime. Its grandeur had faded, and with it, the dreams of immortality that had driven him so relentlessly. The celestial alignment, the intricate dance of gears, was now a forgotten relic, scattered into pieces and stored away in the annals of history. But what of Jakub? What of the man who had crafted the very thing that had once seemed to hold the key to the universe? What did he leave behind? He thought of the many nights spent in the workshop, alone with his tools, his sketches, and his feverish dreams. He had once believed that the clock would be the answer, that by capturing time, he would secure his place in history. Yet now, standing in the quiet of his apartment, Jakub understood something he had never truly grasped before. Time, in all its complexity, was not something that could be controlled. It could only be experienced, lived, and remembered. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. In that moment, he felt a shift. Time, with all its relentless passing, had become something more than just an abstract concept. It was the very fabric of life itself, woven together by the moments we shared with others, the love we gave, the laughter that echoed through our homes, The tears we shed in times of loss, these were the things that lasted, the things that truly endured. What would you sacrifice for eternity? The question echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the choices he had made. He had sacrificed so much in the pursuit of perfection, so much in the name of legacy. But what had it all been for? The clock, his creation, had become a force that had nearly torn the fabric of time apart. Yet, the moments he had shared with others, the quiet conversations, the fleeting moments of joy, those were the things that would remain. They were the threads that wove the story of his life, connecting him to those who had come before him and those who would follow. Jakub had never truly understood the depth of those connections until now. The clock, for all its beauty, had been an attempt to force time into a shape that fit his vision. But time, as he had come to learn, was not something to be molded or controlled. It was something to be lived, to be experienced in all its fleeting beauty. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the city. The sky was alive with color, the horizon glowing with the promise of new beginnings. Jakub watched as the day slowly faded into night, the city's rhythm continuing unabated. The people moved through their lives, unaware of the great forces that had once been at play in their midst. Time, after all, didn't stop for anyone. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the evening, Jakub realized that what he had truly given to the world wasn't his clock or his invention. It was the connections he had forged with the people around him, the friends, the lovers, the strangers whose lives had brushed against his own. Those moments, those brief exchanges, were the treasures that would endure. They were the stories that would be told long after the clock had ceased to tick, the legacy that would be passed down through the ages. He thought of Victor, his once loyal apprentice, who had stood by him through thick and thin, and of Alara, who had offered him guidance when he had lost his way. It was their love and friendship, their belief in him, that had brought him back from the brink of despair. It was the laughter they had shared, the quiet moments of understanding that had made his life worth living. These were the things that truly mattered, the simple, profound connections that bind us together, that echo through the corridors of time. Jakub closed his eyes and smiled. He had been so consumed by the idea of perfection, of leaving behind a legacy that would stand for centuries. But now he understood that legacy was not built on grand gestures or monumental achievements. It was built on the small, quiet moments that weave the fabric of our lives, the love we give, and the lives we touch. Time may never stop moving, but the moments we leave behind are what truly endure. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time today. Jakub's story, his ambition, and his ultimate realization about what truly matters are powerful reminders of the fleeting nature of life and the importance of our connections with others. I hope you found something meaningful in this tale, whether it's a reflection on your own life or a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between ambition and love. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the message of the story. What would you sacrifice for eternity? How do you see the balance between ambition and the moments that truly define our lives? Your feedback means a lot, and it helps us create more content that resonates with you. Until next time, take care, cherish the moments that matter, and keep moving forward.